So politics in Mexico right now, I think, feels a little scrambled in this way. You have the sort of our traditional understandings of who's left, who's right, how these things should work out have been kind of scrambled by the creation of this new party, Morena, and by the total evacuation of legitimacy from the PRD.
And this also, because we'll drill down maybe into some of the promises and problems with AMLO now too, because, and then we'll get to the, potential of regional and U.S. interference to the extent we know anything, because that's always important to talk about, for these elections, particularly in Latin America, I think. But so two things kind of leap out at me with this. I mean, one, so he comes from this distinct tradition, we can call it, where it's sort of like it's a left nationalism, and even though he's been much better than many other political leaders, it seems fair to say, on things like corruption and following through with certain, social provisions and public investment, he still comes from this sort of like model of, you can see like these kind of broad sets of alliances and using the state to build and solidify a coalition. So. Yeah. Even as the left party he left has made an alliance with the center-right, the PRI, of course, also has its own candidate, although I would imagine the PRI, after they've returned to power in the last 4 years and under Peña, who I know I'm mispronouncing that, has been really disastrous. I mean, I imagine they're in a tough position electorally. But what AMLO has done is he's actually entered into his own odd coalition. And I just wonder about the class dimensions of this, because he's actually formed a partnership with an extreme evangelical tendency, which has sympathy for his commitments to ending corruption and expanding social services, but is very, very socially reactionary. So even though he presided over Mexico City, which moved forward on things like reproductive justice and equality, on those types of for gay and lesbian people, nationally the country is still more to the right on those issues. So I guess also, like, does that also reflect that if the PRD and the PAN have united on this center-right, center-left axis, is that basically we're just on an upper middle class continuum? And is AMLO basically saying, like, I'll do the real bottom-up campaign of left activism, but also evangelical? Does that reflect just a different class base? And
that's a really interesting question.
Yeah,
I think that would make sense, but it's really not the case.
Okay.
So obviously the PAN, is the party of Mexico's industrial elites. It has long been, it's a party that was founded in the 1940s and has been the kind of Catholic business party in Mexico. So they have long represented especially industrialists coming in the north. The PRD definitely had a much more concerted focus on Mexico's working people. The interesting thing about AMLO's coalition and about the party Morena is that a great deal of his support actually comes from kind of college-educated, middle-class, people like me, professors, intellectuals, students. And so there definitely he does have a social base among the poor, and his policies are, he is the one candidate really talking about how to improve the lives of Mexico's poor. One of the things that he says constantly is we can't have a country with rich politicians and poor people, right? So the focus of AMLO's campaign, this is another one of the ways in which this scrambled, right? The class politics don't necessarily make sense. There isn't a clear division of sort of AMLO has a working class base, the PAN has the sort of industrialist space, the PRI is in the middle. They're all kind of scrambled in that way. So AMLO having this coalition with this right-wing evangelical party called Encuentro Social, they are a very small party, would not ordinarily be at all important, but it is striking, right, that AMLO has created this coalition with them. There's a sense that he has He talks a lot about sort of morals and family. So it's even though there have been advances in Mexico City, which mostly came after AMLO's term in office, there is still a kind of social conservatism at the base of this and an idea about tradition and morals. The important thing, I think, about AMLO's campaign and about the tradition from which he comes that makes this make sense is that what AMLO is trying to do is regenerate Mexican democracy, right? So this isn't so much a kind of left campaign on, it is on, sort of social and economic issues. He does have some platform ideas there, but he also talks about austerity in government spending, right? The reason that he does that, a thing that might sound strange to us in another context, right? He and Jeremy Corbyn have hung out together. Jeremy Corbyn is the most anti-austerity candidate politician in the world now, right? What AMLO means by austerity is attacking the corruption in the government. There is this broad sense that because the government has been used as this vehicle for the traditional political parties for so long, that the things that the government spends its money on is enriching politicians, right? And so when AMLO talks about government austerity, when he talks about corruption, when he talks about those kinds of things, what the focus of that campaign is really trying to further democratize the Mexican political system, to make Mexican democracy actually meaningful and not just kind of procedural in the way that it has been. And so that question means that some of the sort of traditional left-right things that we might think of get scrambled in this. And so his alliance with the evangelicals, one of his main advisors is a very famous Monterrey industrialist, and one will be the chief of staff of his cabinet. So he has support kind of across the spectrum, right? He wants to bring agricultural subsidies to the countryside because farmers have been so left behind in neoliberal Mexico since NAFTA. But he also has these close alliances with people in the business community, and he's talked a great deal in recent weeks about how he will sort of maintain a kind of sense of economic stability, right? So he's not going to come in and be a radical and overturn and nationalize things. He's said that a number of times now. So his kind of, one of his sort of strongest supporters, professor at the UNAM Law School named John Ackerman, has pointed out that, he's actually very moderate in his economic and social policies. And I think that's because the focus of AMLO's campaign is this question of Mexican democracy, of making the state work, of ending the corruption. And that is that's the lens through which all of these other political decisions are being made.